Clara Hayes adjusted the collar of her sensible tweed jacket, a nervous habit she'd picked up from years of sitting across from powerful people. Today, that powerful person was Mr. Davies, the stern, silver-haired editor-in-chief of Insight Weekly. His office smelled of old paper and ambition, two things Clara was intimately familiar with. "Hayes," Mr. Davies rumbled, pushing a file across his polished mahogany desk. "You've done good work on those political profiles, sharp, incisive. You dig deeper than most of these fluff merchants we call journalists these days." Clara tried not to preen. Praise from Mr. Davies was rarer than a quiet day in New York City. "Thank you, sir. Which is why I'm giving you a unique assignment, one that could make your career or break it." He paused, letting the words hang in the air like smoke from his ever-present pipe. "Elvis Presley." Clara blinked. "Elvis, sir? With all due respect, what could I possibly write about Elvis Presley that hasn't been plastered across every magazine and newspaper in the world? His last concert, his new movie, his sequined jumpsuits, it's all been done precisely. That's the point. Everyone writes about the king, the legend, the showman. They write about the gold records and the screaming fans. But what about the man? Hayes suggesting a tell-all, a scandal piece?" Her stomach churned. She wasn't that kind of journalist. She believed in truth, but not at the expense of a person's dignity. "No," Mr. Davies scoffed. Clara felt a thrill despite herself. This was a challenge, a real challenge. Elvis Presley, the most famous man on the planet, almost. How do you find a quiet moment with a man whose life was a constant whirlwind of adoration and demands? "It's a needle in a haystack, sir," she admitted. "He's always surrounded by people. Security, managers, friends, fans. How would I even get close?" "That's your problem, Hayes," Mr. Davies said, tapping the file. "But here's a tip. My sources tell me that even the biggest stars need to breathe away from Graceland, away from Vegas, away from Hollywood. He sometimes disappears to a secluded property up north. A private retreat hidden away. Quiet. It's unconfirmed, of course." Clara took the file. Inside were vague directions, a blurry satellite photo of a large estate surrounded by dense woods, and a few outdated articles about Elvis's known private habits, his love for horses, his spirifolmi. She spent the next few days immersing herself in everything Elvis, not the public persona, but the hints of the private man. She read interviews where he briefly mentioned missing simplicity or the pressure of constant performance. She watched old concert footage, not for the moves, but for the fleeting expressions in his eyes when the music swelled. She even listened to his gospel albums, finding a sincerity there that was often lost in his rock and roll hits. The more she researched, the more she realized that Mr. Davies was right. Everyone saw the king, but no one seemed to see the man. And if anyone could find him, if anyone could capture that elusive quiet moment, it would be a story for the ages. It wouldn't just be a scoop. It would be a genuine contribution to understanding a living legend. The thought excited her. It also terrified her. With a rental car packed with a few changes of clothes, her trusty notepad and a camera she hoped she wouldn't need to use invasively, Clara set off. The drive was long, taking her deep into the countryside, away from highways and bustling towns. The directions Mr. Davies had given her were vague, leading her down winding, unpaved roads. As she got closer, the trees grew denser, forming a natural shield. She saw no other cars, no signs of life beyond the chirping of birds and the rustling of leaves. Finally, the road ended at a sturdy wrought iron gate, half hidden by overgrown bushes. Beyond it, she could just make out the top of a grand, yet understated house, nestled among towering oaks. There was a long, winding driveway disappearing into the trees, a small hand-painted sign, almost invisible in the foliage, read, "Private property. No entry." Clara parked her car a discreet distance away, out of sight. Her heart hammered in her chest. This was it. This was the place. The air here was different, quieter. It felt like a place where secrets could be kept. She just had to figure out how to get close enough without being noticed, without being intrusive. This wasn't a stakeout, it was an act of patience. She knew that if she barged in, she'd ruin any chance of finding the rare insight. Mr. Davies wanted, she'd have to wait and watch, and hope that the king for once would be just a man. Seeking a moment of peace, Clara spent the next few hours waiting. She didn't approach the gate directly. Instead, she found a discreet spot behind a thick clump of pines, a small rise that gave her a partial view of the property through the dense foliage. It was slow, tedious work. The afternoon sun filtered through the leaves, dappling the ground in shifting patterns of light and shadow. The only sounds were the distant call of a bird and the gentle whisper of the wind through the trees. It was peaceful, almost idyllic, a stark contrast to the cacophony of Elvis's public life. She munched on a granola bar and sipped lukewarm water from her thermos, her eyes scanning the sprawling grounds. The house itself was large, but seemed unpretentious from what she could see. A sturdy brick structure, not flashy, like a mansion, but clearly a comfortable, well-maintained home. There were no signs of activity, no cars other than the one she'd seen earlier, a sleek black Cadillac parked near what looked like a garage. No security guards pacing the perimeter, at least none visible from her vantage point. This truly was a secluded retreat. As the afternoon wore on, a sliver of doubt began to creep in. What if Mr. Davies' tip was wrong? What if Elvis wasn't even here? She was wasting her time, risking a career-ending failure for a wild goose chase. Just as she was about to give up to pack her things and head back to a motel, she saw it. A figure emerged from the back of the house, walking slowly towards a small, tranquil lake that shimmered in the distance. He wasn't wearing a sequin jumpsuit or a flashy stage costume. He was dressed simply. Dark trousers, a loose pale blue shirt, and worn leather loafers. His hair, though still dark and impeccably styled, seemed a little softer, less rigid than in photographs. It was him, Elvis Presley. Clara's breath hitched. Her journalistic instincts screamed to grab her camera, to snap a shot, to document this moment, but something held her back. The way he walked, the slow, deliberate pace, the slight slump of his shoulders. He looked less like the energetic king of rock and roll and more like a man, a tired man perhaps. A man lost in thought. He reached the edge of the lake and stopped. He stood there for a long time, just looking out at the water, his back to her. The sunlight caught the faint ripple of the water reflecting off his dark hair. The scene was almost painterly in its stillness. It was a moment of profound, quiet reflection, exactly what Mr. Davies had asked for. Clara watched him. She saw him rub his temples as if a headache gnawed at him. She saw him sigh, a long, weary exhalation that carried faintly on the breeze. He wasn't performing. He wasn't posing. He was simply being. And in that moment, he seemed incredibly vulnerable. This wasn't a celebrity chasing fame. This was a man carrying a heavy burden. Constant spotlight, the endless demands, the loss of privacy. It must be suffocating. She imagined what it would be like to never truly be alone, to always be on. She knew then that she couldn't approach him like a typical journalist. She couldn't ambush him or demand answers. If she wanted that rare insight, she would have to respect his space, his privacy, even if it meant risking the story. She had to show him she was different. Suddenly he turned. It wasn't a sharp movement, no sudden jerk of a head. It was slow, as if he sensed her presence more than saw her. His gaze swept across the tree line directly towards her hiding spot. Clara froze, holding her breath, convinced she'd been caught. She saw his eyes even from this distance, dark and knowing. He didn't look angry or even surprised. He looked weary and perhaps a little curious. He held her gaze for a long moment, a silent question passing between them. Clara didn't move, didn't hide. She simply met his eyes, letting her sincerity show. She wasn't a threat. She was just there, an observer who had stumbled upon a deeply personal moment. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only a minute or two, he slowly, deliberately raised a hand, not a wave, but a gentle, almost imperceptible gesture. He pointed towards a small, weathered wooden bench a little way off from where he stood, closer to the house, but still by the lake. It wasn't an invitation to approach him directly. It was an unspoken offer, an invitation to sit, to wait, to observe from a slightly less hidden place, an acknowledgement, a risk he was taking. Clara understood. He wasn't inviting her for an interview. He was allowing her to be present, and that, she knew, was a rare insight in itself. She slowly, carefully rose from her hiding spot, her heart pounding a different kind of rhythm now. Not fear, but a quiet awe. Clara's movements were slow, deliberate. She didn't want to startle him, didn't want to break the fragile spell of the moment. She walked out of the dense woods, making sure her every step was visible, not hidden. She wasn't sneaking, she was approaching with respect. Elvis hadn't moved from his spot by the lake. He watched her, his expression still unreadable. A blend of weariness and a deep, quiet introspection. As she got closer, she saw the lines etched around his eyes, the subtle shadows beneath them. He wasn't as young as the glossy magazine covers made him out to be. He was a man with a lot of miles on him, a lot of experiences, both good and bad. She stopped about 20 feet from him near the bench he had indicated. "Mr. Presley." Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper, almost afraid to disturb the stillness. He finally turned fully towards her, his posture relaxed, but still carrying an innate power even in his quietude. "I figured I wasn't alone," he said, his voice deeper and softer than she expected, without the usual drawl of his interviews. It was a private voice. "You've been out there a while." Clara nodded. "Yes, sir. I apologize for the intrusion. My name is Clara Hayes. I'm a journalist for Inside Weekly." She held up her small notepad, a gesture of transparency. I was given an assignment to try and find a different story about you, not the usual kind. Something real." He looked at the notepad, then back at her eyes. "A real story. What does that even mean when you're me? Everything I do is real to someone, and everything I do is also a show." He chuckled, a sound without much humor. "People always want the truth, but they usually want their truth, not mine." "I understand that, Mr. Presley," Clara said, taking a step closer to the bench. "And I don't want to exploit anything. I'm not here for gossip or scandal. I'm here because my editor believes, and I agree, that there's more to you than the public image, that even the king needs a moment of quiet, and that those moments, if respectfully shared, might offer something valuable to people." "Valuable? You think people want to read about me staring at a lake?" "Perhaps," Clara said, choosing her words carefully. "Perhaps they want to know what the king thinks about when he's not on stage, what makes him human, what burdens he carries, what he dreams of when the lights are off." Elvis was silent again, his gaze drifting back to the lake. The silence was not awkward, not threatening. It was a space for thought. She watched the subtle shifting of emotions on his face. A flicker of weariness, then contemplation, then a shadow of something that looked like loneliness. Finally he spoke, his voice almost a murmur. "You're not like the others." It wasn't a question, but an observation. "I believe in telling stories with integrity. My editor asked for insight, not sensation." He turned back to her, and this time his eyes seemed to hold a flicker of curiosity, maybe even a tiny spark of hope. "And you think you can find insight in me? After all these years, all the interviews, all the books, what makes you think you can see something no one else has?" Clara took a breath. She said simply, "I'm willing to listen without judgment. I'm willing to see the person, not just a legend. I believe everyone has a quiet place inside them, and sometimes it just needs a little space to emerge." He studied her face. She held his gaze, her own, steady and open. She was just being herself, a sincere young woman trying to do her job with respect. After a long moment, a slow, almost imperceptible nod, he gestured again towards the bench, this time with a clearer movement of his hand. "Well," he said, his voice still low, "the sun's starting to go down? Might as well sit if you're staying. It's a nice view. It wasn't an invitation for an interview. It was a quiet permission, a silent, tentative welcome into his private space. He hadn't agreed to anything, but he hadn't sent her away either. It was the most precious invitation Clara had ever received. She walked towards the bench and sat down, placing her notepad beside her, not opening it. She simply sat looking out at the lake, just as he was. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The air was cool and fresh. The silence now shared felt less heavy, almost comforting. She was here. She had a chance. And it felt less like a story and more like a privilege. The silence between them stretched comfortable rather than awkward. Clara kept her notepad closed, her pen untouched. This wasn't an interview. It was a shared moment. She followed Ellis's gaze, watching the last slivers of sunlight dance on the lake's surface. A lone duck paddled slowly, leaving a V-shaped ripple behind it. The air was filled with the sounds of nature, the rustling of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, the gentle lapping of the water against the shore. It was a symphony of peace, so different from the roar of concert arenas or the endless chatter of movie sets. Finally, Elvis broke the quiet. His voice was soft, almost a murmur, as if speaking to himself. "You know, this is the only place I can truly hear myself think." He paused, then added, "Or sometimes not think at all, just be." Clara turned her head slightly towards him. "It's beautiful here," she said, her voice equally low. "So peaceful." He nodded, still looking out at the water. "Peaceful. That's a luxury for me these days. My life. It's a tornado. A beautiful, wonderful tornado. But a tornado nonetheless, always moving, always loud. Sometimes I feel like I'm caught in the eye of the storm, just spinning and spinning." "Do you miss the quiet?" Clara asked, feeling the words more than articulating them. He sighed, a long, deep breath. "More than you know. Sometimes I miss just going to the store, buying a newspaper, getting a cup of coffee without a dozen flashbulbs going off, just being normal, whatever normal is." He looked at her then, his eyes holding a surprising depth. Clara thought of her own life, the pressures of her job, the constant need to prove herself, to stand out. I think everyone, no matter who they are, sometimes longs for a little anonymity, a moment to just be themselves without labels or expectations. He nodded slowly. "Les. Yeah. The king, the icon. It's a heavy crown, Clara, much heavier than it looks." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his hands loosely clasped. "My mama, she always said I was a sensitive boy. Used to sing in church just for the joy of it. Never thought it would lead to all this." He gestured vaguely at the vast property around them, then beyond it, the world that knew his name. "Never thought I'd be so famous. I couldn't even walk down the street without causing a riot." "Was that hard to get used to?" Clara asked, still keeping her voice gentle. "Hard? It was like being reborn into a different body, one that wasn't mine anymore, one that belonged to everyone else." He paused, lost in thought. "I remember when I first started out playing those little clubs in Memphis. It was just me, a guitar, and a dream. I loved the music, the way it made people feel." The faint smile touched his lips. It was pure, then, just pure joy. He was opening up, not in a grand public way, but in the intimate whisper of a shared sunset. Clara felt a profound sense of privilege. This was the man behind the legend, sharing a piece of his history, a piece of his heart. She saw the humble beginnings, the boy who loved music before the world descended upon him. And now, Clara prompted, almost imperceptibly. His smile faded slightly. "And I wonder if he'd recognize the man I am now." He looked at her, a profound question in his dark eyes. "Would he? Clara, would he?" Clara didn't have an immediate answer. She didn't need one. His question hung in the air, a raw, honest self-doubt from the man who was worshipped by millions. It was a glimpse into the internal struggle of an icon. A fragile moment that only a quiet, trusted presence could uncover. This was the rare insight, and it was far more compelling. The last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon, and the sky deepened to a rich indigo. A few stars began to twinkle into existence. The air grew cooler, and Clara hugged her arms around herself. Elvis noticed, and without a word, rose and disappeared briefly into the house. He returned a moment later with a soft wool blanket, which he gently draped over Clara's shoulders. "Thank you, Mr. Presley," she said, touched by his simple kindness. It was another moment that chipped away at the larger-than-life image, revealing the thoughtful man beneath. "Elvis," he corrected softly. "Please, if we're going to talk like this, just call me Elvis." Clara felt a warmth spread through her, not just from the blanket, but from the acceptance in his voice. "Clara," she replied, a genuine smile touching her lips. He sat back down. "You know the hardest part isn't the work or the travel. It's the being seen every second. Even when you're just trying to grab a bite to eat or go to the movies with friends, every move is watched, analyzed. It must be exhausting," Clara said, truly understanding. "It is," he admitted, his gaze drifting back to the now dark lake. "Sometimes I just want to disappear just for a day, walk through a crowded street, and not have anyone recognize me. See the world without being the center of attention." "What would you do?" she asked, genuinely curious. "I'd go to a small diner, one of those places with red pie mousse and a jukebox, order a stack of pancakes, read the new Blackbird." "Sounds pretty boring, doesn't it, for the king of rock and roll?" "It sounds human," Clara countered, "and perfectly normal. Everyone craves simple moments." He looked at her, a different kind of curiosity in his eyes. "What about you, Clara? You're a journalist, always observing, always writing. Do you ever get to just be?" Clara was surprised by the question. Most celebrities she interviewed rarely turned the focus on her. "Not as much as I'd like," she admitted. "There's always a deadline, a new story, a need to prove yourself. Especially as a woman in this field, you feel like you have to work twice as hard to be taken seriously." "I can imagine," Elvis said, nodding. "The spotlight's different for everyone, but it's still a spotlight." "I love what I do," Clara continued, "telling stories, uncovering truths. But sometimes I dream of something completely different. I love to paint landscapes mostly. Something about capturing the quiet beauty of nature. It's my escape, my own quiet place." A genuine smile, warm and unforced, appeared on Elvis's face. "Painting, that's beautiful, Clara. A way to create something just for yourself, not for the world to judge. I get that. Music used to be like that for me, just creating, not thinking about charts. This place, it's like you're painting. My landscape." "It is," Clara agreed, feeling a profound connection blossoming between them. It wasn't about celebrity and journalist anymore. It was about two people sharing their desires for peace, for creativity, for a space to simply be themselves. "So you're looking for a story," Elvis said, breaking the quiet spell but without malice. "And you found me sitting here talking about pancakes and painting. Is that the rare insight Mr. Davies sent you for?" Clara met his gaze, her voice firm. "It's more than that, Elvis. It's the understanding that even the king needs moments away from his throne, that behind the dazzling lights and the roaring crowds, there's a man who misses the simple things, who dreams of anonymity, who finds peace in quiet beauty. That insight is rare, because most people only ever see the performance. They never see the soul." He studied her for a moment, and Clara saw a flicker of something she hadn't expected, a hint of relief, a subtle easing of the ever-present tension in his posture. He hadn't just allowed her into his space. He was beginning to trust that she saw him, truly saw him for who he was, and that, to Clara, was the greatest privilege of all. As the night deepened, a chill settled over the lake. Elvis and Clara retreated to a small enclosed patio area off the main house, where a stone fireplace cast a warm, comforting glow. "So, painting, huh?" Elvis said, pouring them both a cup. "You ever thought of doing it professionally?" Clara shook her head. "No, it's just for me, a hobby. If I tried to make a living from it, I think it would stop being special. It would become work, and I'd lose the joy in it." He nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I understand that completely. That's how I feel about music. Come us, it started as pure. Just us." He looked into the flames, his eyes reflecting the dance of the fire. Clara inquired. "Beyond the hits, beyond the demands." He took a slow sip of coffee. "Gospel, always gospel. That's where it all began for me. It's the truth, you know. It's about faith and hope, and finding something bigger than yourself. And the blues, the raw honesty of it, the pain, the joy, the struggle. It's all there." He then began to hum softly, a low, melodic tune that Clara recognized as an old gospel hymn. His voice in this quiet setting without amplification or a band was even more powerful and deeply resonant than she expected. It was pure, unaffected, full of soul. It was a private performance just for her. Clara felt a lump in her throat. This wasn't the showman, this was the artist, the spiritual man. "Do you feel disconnected sometimes?" he sighed. "Always. It's the paradox of fame. You're known by everyone, loved by millions, but truly known by very few. And those few, they have to carry a lot of your burdens too. They see the real you. But they also see the king. It's hard to separate. Prayer, being out here, away from everything. And sometimes," he looked at her, a faint smile on his face, "talking to someone who isn't asking for an autograph or a photo. Someone who just listens." Clara felt a surge of gratitude. "I think about legacy a lot," he continued, staring into the fire. "But will people remember? The jumpsuits, the movies? Or will they remember the music? The feeling I tried to put into it? I hope it's the music. The real heart of it." He paused, then added almost as an afterthought, "And I hope they remember that I tried my best, that I was just a boy from Tupelo who loved to sing, and that it all got bigger than I ever imagined. But that I always, always tried to give back to the people who gave so much to me." He was speaking not just about his career, but about his life's purpose, his deepest anxieties, and his profound appreciation for his audience. Clara realized that this wasn't just a reflection. It was a quiet confession, a sharing of his very essence. This insight was invaluable, not just for a magazine article, but for understanding the human spirit under extraordinary circumstances. It was far beyond any interview she had ever done. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls of the patio. Elvis leaned back in his chair, a rare vulnerability in his posture. "You know," he began, his voice softer now, "the scariest thing about this life isn't falling. It's staying up there. The pressure to always be more, to always be better. What if people just stop caring?" He rubbed his temples slowly. "It's a constant battle, Clara, trying to live up to everyone's idea of who Elvis Presley is supposed to be." Clara listened, her heart aching with empathy. "It sounds like a gilded cage," she whispered. "It is," he confirmed. "Beautiful on the outside, but sometimes you just want to fly free, to try new things, to fail sometimes without the whole world watching and judging. To just be average," he chuckled, a self-deprecating sound. "Can you imagine the king being average? People would riot." He gazed into the fire again, his eyes distant. "I worry about my little girl Lisa Marie, I want to give her everything, the best of everything. But I also want her to know me, the real me. Not just the guy on the TV. I want her to have a normal life, or as normal as it can be with me. As her daddy. His voice was tinged with a father's deep love and worry. That's my greatest hope, that she knows I loved her more than anything, and that I tried my best to be there for her, despite all this. He gestured vaguely at his public life. And what about your hopes? For yourself? Elvis, Clara asked gently. I hope I can keep singing, keep creating music that means something, not just hits, but songs that touch people's hearts, songs that last. I hope I can find more moments like this, moments of peace, where I can just breathe and be myself. He looked at her, a flicker of something like longing in his eyes. And maybe, I hope I can still make a difference. Use this fame, this platform for something good, something real. Clara saw the weight of his legacy, the immense burden he carried, the loneliness that came with being so widely adored, yet so fundamentally isolated. It was a profound realization. Fame wasn't a dream. It was a job, a life, a burden, and a constant negotiation with self. She felt a surge of protectiveness. Not as a journalist seeking a story, but as one human being witnessing another's raw vulnerability. She had come here for a scoop, but she was leaving with a deep understanding of a man's heart. You already make a difference, Elvis, she said, her voice firm with conviction. Your music has touched millions. Your generosity is legendary, and just by being willing to share a piece of yourself like this, you've already offered something truly valuable. It shows people with the same fears and hopes, the same need for peace and understanding. He looked at her, and this time, the weariness in his eyes seemed to lessen, replaced by a glimmer of gratitude. You really think so? I do, Clara insisted. More than you know. Most people only see the performance, the persona. They don't see the struggles, the quiet moments, the longing for normalcy, showing them that part of you. That's an incredible gift. They fell into a comfortable silence again, the fire casting long shadows on their faces. Clara felt a strange mix of emotions, exhilaration at the story she had, and a heavy sense of responsibility for how she would tell it. This wasn't just another profile. This was an entrusted secret, a shared moment of humanity. It deserved to be handled with the utmost care and respect. The rare insight was not just what she had learned about Elvis, but what she had learned about the human cost of fame and her own integrity as a journalist. The night was fully upon them now. The stars were bright in the clear country sky, far from the city lights. The fire had settled into glowing embers, casting a soft, warm light that made the patio feel even more intimate. The conversation had dwindled. The deepest confessions made Elvis stirred, a quiet sigh escaping his lips. It's getting late, Clara. He wasn't dismissing her, just acknowledging the passage of time. Clara nodded, a sense of both accomplishment and apprehension settling over her. She had the story. More than that, she had been given a rare gift, a glimpse into the soul of a living legend. But now came the hard part, how to tell it. He looked at her, his dark eyes searching hers. So you have your story? His voice was calm, but there was an unspoken question, a silent plea in his gaze. Will you be like the others? Will you exploit this? Or will you see me? Clara felt the weight of his trust, the trust of a man who rarely, if ever, allowed himself to be truly seen. She thought of her editor, Mr. Davies, and his demand for insight, not sensation. She thought of all the tabloid headlines, the gossip, the constant scrutiny that had plagued Elvis's life. She could write a piece that would shock the world. She could reveal the hidden vulnerabilities, the lonely moments, the fears he had confessed. It would be a sensation, a career-making scoop that would put Insight Weekly on every newsstand. But it would be a betrayal of the fragile trust he had placed in her in the quiet of this secluded night. It would be using his humanity against him, or she could write a different kind of story, one that honored his trust. One that highlighted his humanity, his depth, his quiet yearning for simplicity without turning it into a spectacle. It might not be as sensational, but it would be true, and it would be respectful. Her mind raced. She saw the headlines that could be written: Elvis, the Lonely King, The Burden of the Crown, Elvis's Secret Fears. These were all true in a way, but they felt exploitative, reducing his complex emotions to clickbait. No, that wasn't what Mr. Davies had asked for, not truly. He had asked for insight. And insight wasn't about tearing someone down. It was about understanding them. Clara met his gaze, her voice firm and clear, full of conviction. I will write about the man I met tonight. Elvis, the one who misses simple moments, who yearns for peace, who cares deeply about his music and his family. I will write about your humanity, your reflections, your strength, and your quiet hopes. She paused, then added, I will write a story that shows the world the truth of who you are, beyond the image. A story that respects the trust you've shown me. I won't sensationalize it. I won't betray your confidence, I promise. A flicker of something relief, perhaps, or a profound sense of understanding crossed his face. He held her gaze for a long moment, then slowly a faint smile touched his lips. It wasn't the public smile, but a genuine private one, full of gratitude. Thank you, Clara, he said, his voice husky. Thank you for seeing me. Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest. It was integrity. It was respect. It was the deepest form of journalistic success. She knew then with absolute certainty what kind of story she would write. It wouldn't be about breaking news, but about breaking through the noise. It would be about connection, about shared humanity, and about the quiet power of a soul seeking peace in a world that constantly demanded a performance. She gathered her things, her notepad still closed, the words already forming in her mind not as notes, but as feelings, as insights. As she stood to leave, he walked her back to the edge of the property, not quite to her car, but far enough from the house. You're a good person, Clara Hayes, he said, extending his hand. A rare one. Clara took his hand. His grip was warm and strong. And you, Elvis Presley, she replied, looking directly into his eyes, are a truly rare king. They parted ways in the quiet darkness, the understanding between them as clear and bright as the stars above. The drive back to the city felt different. The rural quiet slowly gave way to the distant hum of traffic, then the familiar rush of urban life. But Clara felt a calm she hadn't anticipated. She wasn't buzzing with the frantic energy of a journalist who just landed a scoop. She was imbued with a quiet sense of purpose. Back at her desk, in the bustling newsroom, the usual chaos felt amplified. Phones rang, typewriters clattered, voices debated, headlines. Mr. Davies appeared at her cubicle, an expectant look on his face. So Hayes, he boomed, did you get it? The scoop, the real story. Did the king spill any beans? Clara met his gaze unflinching. I got a story, Mr. Davies, a very real one, but it's not what you might expect. Oh, don't tell me he just gave you some canned press release. He scoffed, already sounding disappointed. No, sir. He gave me himself, his quiet self, his reflective self, the man behind the phenomenon. Clara looked at him directly. I promised him I wouldn't sensationalize it. I promised to write with respect. Mr. Davies raised an eyebrow. Respect, Hayes. We run a magazine, not a fan club. People want the dirt, the drama. They want to know if he's happy, if he's losing his touch. If he's got secret vices, they'll get something more profound, Clara stated firmly. They'll get a portrait of a human being grappling with immense fame, seeking peace burdened by expectation, but still finding joy and hope. It's about the quiet loneliness of being Elvis, the simple desires of a man who lives an extraordinary life. The words weren't jotted down. They were etched in her memory, in her heart. He misses simple things. Mr. Davies going to a diner, walking anonymously in a park. He fears losing his voice, disappointing his fans. He finds solace in gospel music and quiet moments by a lake. He worries about being a good father. Mr. Davies listened, his initial skepticism slowly giving way to a flicker of intrigue. He was a shrewd editor, and he recognized sincerity when he heard it, even if it wasn't the usual fare. Not a scandal, no, Clara continued, her voice gaining strength. But it's an insight into the soul of one of the most famous men alive. It's the story of a man, not just a king, and I believe it's far more Ethel, far more unique than any gossip could ever be. She began to write, the words flowing effortlessly onto the page. She described the quiet lake, the way the light fell on his face, the almost imperceptible sigh he gave. She wrote about his deep, soft voice, the raw honesty in his eyes. She wove in his words about missing anonymity, his fears for his daughter, his passion for gospel music, his desire to simply be. She painted a picture of a man who, despite his immense fame, was incredibly relatable in his human struggles and desires. She titled the article, after much deliberation, "The King's Quiet Throne, a Glimpse into the Private World of Elvis Presley." When she handed it to Mr. Davies a few days later, he took it with a sigh, clearly still half expecting disappointment. He sat down and began to read. Clara watched him, her heart pounding. His expression remained neutral at first, then softened slightly. He didn't make any notes, didn't scoff. He just read. Finally he finished, placing the manuscript gently on his desk. He looked up at Clara, and for the first time she saw something akin to respect, even admiration in his eyes. "Hayes," he said, his voice quieter than usual, "this isn't what I expected." "Not at all." He paused. "It's better, much better. You found it the insight. It's human and incredibly compelling." He tapped the pages. "It's a different kind of story, but it's a powerful one. You honored your promise and you still delivered. Well done, Hayes. Very well done." A wave of relief washed over Clara. She had done it. She had found the rare insight, kept her integrity, and delivered a story that was true to the man, not just the myth. The article was approved for publication, her name boldly printed beneath the thoughtful title. It was a victory, not just for her career, but for her soul. The issue of Insight Weekly, featuring Clara's article, hit the newsstands with a quiet ripple, not a splash. It wasn't a sensational headline screaming betrayal or scandal. It was a more contemplative cover, featuring a thoughtful, slightly subdued photo of Elvis. Not a stage shot, but one that hinted at his private moments. The title, "The King's Quiet Throne," intrigued readers who were used to seeing only the glitter and the showmanship. The article itself was unlike anything written about Elvis before. Clara had meticulously crafted every word, ensuring that Elvis's vulnerability was shared with empathy, not exploitation. She wrote about the profound loneliness of being constantly watched, the yearning for simple anonymity, the fears and hopes that plagued even the most iconic of men. She didn't reveal anything scandalous, just deeply human. She focused on the feeling, the atmosphere of their encounter, the quiet reflections of a man burdened by his own legend. The initial reaction was mixed. Some fans, accustomed to idolizing an untouchable superstar, found it a little too raw, too real. But many others, particularly those who truly loved his music and saw beyond the spectacle, felt a profound connection to the portrait Clara had painted. Letters poured into Insight Weekly, not just about Elvis, but about the article itself. Readers wrote that they felt they finally understood the man, not just the king. They saw his struggles, his heart, and felt a new depth of empathy for him. Other journalists were taken by surprise. Some scoffed at its lack of hard news, but many secretly admired Clara's courage to defy expectations and write something so deeply respectful and in Sheila. It started conversations in newsrooms about the ethics of celebrity, journalism, and the responsibility of the media. Weeks later, a small unmarked package arrived at the Insight Weekly office for Clara Hayes. It contained a single, beautifully pressed white gardenia, still fragrant, and a classic Maing album, one of Elvis's gospel records. "How great thou art." There was no note, no card. No note. It was Elvis's silent acknowledgement, his quiet thank you for keeping her promise, for truly seeing him. It was a gesture that spoke volumes, a testament to the fragile trust they had built in that secluded garden. Mr. Davies, seeing the package on her desk, raised an eyebrow. "A secret admirer, Hayes," he quipped, but there was a hint of knowing in his eyes. Clara just smiled, a private, contented smile. "Perhaps, sir?" Or perhaps just a king who appreciates a moment of quiet reflection. Her career at Insight Weekly certainly gained respect. She was given more freedom and trusted with more challenging, nuanced assignments. But more importantly, Clara herself had changed. She understood now that the most powerful stories weren't always the loudest or the most sensational. They were often the quiet ones, the ones that revealed the shared humanity that connected everyone, from the most famous king to the everyday person. She continued to write, always seeking the truth, always with empathy, always remembering the quiet, reflective man by the lake. She learned that journalism at its best could be a bridge of understanding, a way to illuminate the human spirit, not just expose its flaws. And she knew that the rarest insight of all wasn't just finding Elvis in a moment of quiet reflection, but understanding the profound need for it in every soul, famous or not. The heartwarming truth was that even the king, at his core, was just a man yearning to be seen and understood, not just adored. And for a brief, rare moment, Clara Hayes had offered him just that.